The exam room was cold. Not the kind of cold that makes you shiver and pull your coat tighter. The kind of cold that gets inside the walls, inside the air recyclers, inside the white polymer panels lining the ceiling. The kind of cold that tells you without saying a single word that this place was designed for efficiency. Not comfort, not warmth, just efficiency. Medical Bay 7, aboard the IGV Eternal Meridian, was the pride of the Galactic Union's 14th Fleet. 3 floors of diagnostic equipment, neural mapping arrays, bioresonance chambers that could detect a cellular mutation 6 generations before it would ever manifest as a symptom. The Bay had treated 11 alien species since the ship launched. It had cataloged over 400 distinct physiologies, blood chemistries, nervous system configurations. It had never processed a human transfer before. That was the thing nobody said out loud that morning. Not the nurses, not the medical technicians, not even the senior staff physician, Dr. Valith San, who had 40 years of union medical practice behind her, and who prided herself on remaining professionally neutral about literally everything. Nobody said it, but everyone was thinking it. The human is coming. I was the one who had to prep the room. My name is Cadet Specialist Oren Dow. I'm Calthine, born on the outer rim of the Calthine Belt, third moon, in a settlement that probably doesn't exist anymore given what happened in the resource wars. I'm 26 standard years. I've been stationed aboard the Meridian for 14 months. I run diagnostics. I prep rooms. I fetch charts and log scan results and refill the sterilization canisters on the countertop beside Bay 3. I'm not a doctor. I'm not even close. But I was there that morning. I was in the room when she walked in, and I was in the room when the Admiral froze, and I am one of 4 people who actually saw what happened in the minutes between those 2 moments. So I was asked to give testimony, and I'm giving it. Her name was Petty Officer 2nd Class Maren Voss. 29 years old, standard human, 5 feet 6 inches by their old measurement system, which the Union converts to roughly 1.67 standard meters. Brown hair she'd pulled back in a bun so tight it looked almost painful. Brown eyes, a jaw that suggested she didn't smile easily or often or for reasons that weren't her own. She had transferred to the Meridian 3 weeks before the exam, part of the Human Integration Initiative, the Union's formal program to incorporate Earth's military personnel into galactic fleet service following the Accord of '64. The Accord was 4 years old by then. The integration was still moving slowly. Most ships had maybe 1 or 2 humans on board. Some flagships had departments. The Meridian was a flagship. We had a full unit, 47 personnel from Earth spread across engineering, navigation, tactical support, and just one in medical. That was Petty Officer Voss. She was assigned to Medical Bay 7 as a trauma support specialist. Her union file said she had 17 years of field medical experience, which sounded impressive until you realized she started training at 12, which, by union standards, was unusual but not unheard of among species with shorter lifespans. She had recommendations from 3 different commanding officers. She had completed the Union's accelerated integration curriculum in 11 weeks. The recommended time was 20. She had scored in the top 2 percentile on procedural medical assessments. She had also, according to her transfer summary, requested to delay her standard intake medical examination twice. The second delay had been overruled, hence the appointment. I got to Bay 7 at 0600, 2 hours before the appointment. Dr. Valith had asked me to make sure everything was calibrated correctly. Standard intake for a new species physiology required adjustments. The bioresonance frequency had to be tuned to human cellular density. The neural scanner sensitivity had to be lowered by about 40% because human neural networks apparently fire differently than the 16 other Union species the equipment was built for. and the standard environmental temperature had to be raised by 4 degrees because humans run warm. I made the adjustments. I restocked the counter. I double-checked the scan log interface. I refilled the sterilization canisters. And then I stood there in the clean white quiet of Bay 7, with nothing to do but wait. I'll be honest with you. I was nervous, and I wasn't even the patient. I'd seen images of humans before. Everyone had. The union broadcasts ran integration footage constantly, all very official and carefully edited. Shaking hands and diplomatic smiles and 2 species standing side by side under flags. Very reassuring, very staged. I'd met exactly 2 humans before Petty Officer Voss. One in a transit terminal who'd been moving too fast to have a conversation. One in the ship's commissary, a navigation ensign named Brecker who laughed too loud and ate something called a protein bar that smelled like sweetened cardboard and seemed deeply proud of it. Neither encounter had prepared me for Marin Voss. She arrived at 07:58, 2 minutes early. She came through the bay door with that specific kind of walk, not fast, not slow, just deliberate. Like she'd calculated exactly how quickly she needed to move to arrive exactly when she intended. She was in her off-duty uniform, long-sleeved, even though the bay was now 4 degrees warmer than standard. I noticed the long sleeves. I registered it. I didn't think about it. She stopped just inside the door, looked at the room, scanned it, almost, the way you look at a new space when you're trying to understand it, and then she looked at me. "Cadet Dow," she said. Her voice was lower than I'd expected. Calm, flat almost, but not unkind, more like contained. "Yes, Petty Officer, good morning." I reached for my chart interface. "Dr. Valeth will be with you shortly. If you want to have a seat on." "I know what a medical bay looks like," she said, not rudely, just stating a fact. "Right," I put the chart down. "Of course." She crossed to the exam platform, a raised table in the center of the room, white polymer surface, and sat on the edge of it. Not nervously, not stiffly, she just sat, spine straight, hands in her lap, eyes straight ahead. She looked like someone who knew how to wait, had been waiting for things her whole life and had made peace with it. I went back to my counter. I pretended to be very busy with the sterilization canisters. Dr. Valeth came in at 08:03. She was everything her reputation suggested. Tall, even for a Sarathi, nearly 2 meters, with the characteristic pale silver skin and the long expressive secondary eyelids her species used for subtle emotional signaling. She wore her coat with the collar pressed flat. She carried her chart the way she carried everything, like it was already part of her, an extension of her arm, not a thing she was holding. She looked at Petty Officer Voss. She gave the small professional nod that served as her standard greeting. Then she looked at her chart. "Petty Officer Marin Voss," she said. "This is your standard intake physical. The process takes approximately 40 minutes. You'll begin with vital signs, then a bioresonance full-body scan, followed by neural pattern mapping and—" "I'm familiar with Union intake protocol," Petty Officer Voss said, still calm, not interrupting, exactly, more like finishing a sentence that didn't need to be finished. "I completed the integration curriculum." Dr. Valeth paused. The secondary eyelids flickered, which on a Sarathi means something between surprise and reassessment. "Excellent," she said after a beat. "Then we'll get started." The first 22 minutes were completely normal. Vitals, normal for human baseline. Heart rate slightly lower than the integration handbook suggested, which Dr. Valeth noted without comment. Blood pressure within acceptable ranges. Respiratory function clean. Temperature, and this was one I had looked up ahead of time because it seemed medically significant, 37.1 Celsius, which is apparently almost exactly mid-range for a healthy human. The bioresonance scan took 11 minutes. Petty Officer Voss lay perfectly still inside the scanning arch, arms at her sides, breathing slow and even. The arch moved over her in segments, reading each section of her body in overlapping passes. I was watching the readout display, not because I was supposed to. Dr. Valeth was handling that, but because I was curious. I'd never seen a human body scan before. It was different, not alarming, just not what I expected. Humans have a denser bone matrix than most Union species. The calcium density registered higher on the resonance screen than the Sarathi baseline the equipment defaulted to. Their muscular tissue is layered in an unusual way, not more or less sophisticated than other species, just structured differently, packed tighter in certain areas. Dr. Valeth had explained ahead of time that this was because humans evolved for a specific gravity and atmosphere that the integration handbook described as more demanding than Union standard. None of that surprised me. What surprised me was the silence. When the scan finished, Dr. Valeth went quiet. It wasn't the efficient, processing quiet of a doctor reviewing data. It was a different kind of quiet, the kind where the quiet itself is the response. She stood at the readout display for 14 seconds, I counted, because the silence felt strange enough to count, and then she tapped her earpiece. "Cadet Dow," she said, without turning around. "Please request that Admiral Vore present himself in Medical Bay 7 at his earliest convenience." I stared at the back of her head. "The Admiral." "Admiral Thesson Vore," she said, still not turning. "Yes." I looked at Petty Officer Voss. She had sat up on the exam platform. Her expression hadn't changed, still that same contained, waiting expression, but something in her jaw had tightened almost imperceptibly. She knew something was different. "Is there a problem?" she asked. "The scan has returned some results I'd like a second opinion on," Dr. Valeth said. "And then, this is the part I still think about." She turned around and looked at Petty Officer Voss directly, and her secondary eyelids dropped to half-closed, which is the Sarathi expression for something between profound respect and sorrow. "Nothing to be concerned about medically, Petty Officer. I want to assure you of that immediately." Petty Officer Voss held her gaze. "Then what?" Dr. Valeth was quiet for 2 seconds. "Old injuries," she said. "A great many of them." Admiral Thesson Vore was the commanding officer of the IGV Eternal Meridian. I'm telling you his rank so you understand what it meant for Dr. Valeth to summon him. Admirals don't come to medical bays for intake physicals. Admirals come to medical bays for emergencies, for death notifications, for decisions that require rank. They don't come for paperwork. He arrived in 9 minutes. I know because I was counting everything by then. I was standing against the counter, chart interface in my hands, trying to look invisible, and I was counting every second because something about the room felt like it was building towards something, and I didn't know what. Admiral Vore was Keth. Blue-gray scaled skin, dark eyes with horizontal pupils, the distinctive crest that Keth males grew after age 40 that curved back along the skull like a smooth ridge of darker scale. He was 61 standard years. He had commanded 3 vessels before the Meridian. He had 14 commendations. He had fought in the Outer Arm conflict, the siege of Doreth Station, and the first incursion of the Pale Swarm. He was not someone who froze. I want to make sure you understand that. Before I tell you what happened next, Admiral Vore was the kind of officer who had stood on a bridge while the ship was actively taking fire and given orders in the same measured voice he used to give them during a calm transit. He had watched species die. He had seen battles. He had made the kinds of decisions that keep you awake at night for decades. He was not someone who froze. He came through the bay door, crest high, posture straight, and he looked at Dr. Valeth and said, "What have you got, Doctor?" She didn't answer immediately. She turned the readout display so it faced him and stepped back. He walked forward, looked at the screen, looked at the data the bioresonance scan had produced. And he froze. I want to try to describe what I saw on that display screen because it matters. It matters a lot, actually. The bioresonance scan produces a layered map of the body. Bones appear in white, soft tissue in pale blue, neural clusters in gold, circulatory patterns in red. The whole thing renders in 3 dimensions, rotating slowly, color-coded by system. There was nothing wrong with Petty Officer Voss on that scan. Nothing damaged, nothing currently malformed, nothing that indicated disease or ongoing injury. What the scan showed was the history. Old fractures healed. The bones had knit back together completely. That's why they showed up as density anomalies rather than breaks. 6 distinct old fractures in the ribs alone, 2 in the left forearm, 1 in the right clavicle, 3 in the metacarpal bones of the right hand, the knuckles. Both tibias showed hairline fracture histories. The left shoulder had 3 separate old fracture sites. The soft tissue was worse. Old lacerations leave traces in bioresonance scans not visible on the surface, but the deep tissue reformation shows up. The scan showed extensive scarring throughout the dermis layer, back, shoulders, bilateral, upper arms, parts of both legs. The neural pattern, the gold layer, showed something else that I hadn't known to look for, but Dr. Valith pointed to in her later debrief. Old trauma response signatures, healed nerve pathways that had been damaged and rerouted by the body itself. The neural map of someone who had spent years allowing their nervous system to adapt around repeated injury. Admiral Vore stood in front of that screen for what felt like a very long time. Petty Officer Voss sat on the exam platform and watched him. She didn't look away. She didn't look down. She sat with that straight spine and those quiet hands, and she watched him process what he was seeing, and her expression was, it wasn't resignation exactly. It wasn't shame. It was something I didn't have a word for in Calthine or in Standard. Braced, she looked braced. Like she had been waiting for this specific moment her whole life, and she was determined to meet it without flinching. The Admiral turned from the display screen. He turned and he looked at her, really looked, the way people look at something when they're trying to understand it, and they're not sure they have the capacity to, and then he spoke. Petty Officer Voss. Sir, I'm looking at your bioresonance scan. Yes, sir, a pause. I assumed you were. He was quiet for a beat. This represents, he stopped, started again. The fractures, the tissue damage, this accumulation of injury represents, he stopped again. I had never seen the Admiral stop mid-sentence, not once in 14 months. Years, Petty Officer Voss said, filling in the sentence he couldn't finish. Her voice was flat and steady. Yes, sir, years. What happened to you? And this is the part. This is the moment I keep coming back to, that I told my bunkmate about and my shift partner about, and that I have replayed more times than I can count. Not because of what happened next, because of how she looked when he asked. For exactly 1 second, Petty Officer Marin Voss looked like a person who had been carrying something incredibly heavy for an incredibly long time, and who had just been asked out loud, by another living being, looking straight at her, whether it was heavy. 1 second. Then she put it back. The war, sir, she said. The one we fought before you knew we were fighting it. The room went quiet. Not the efficient kind, not the waiting kind. The kind of quiet that forms when something has been said that's too large for the room, and the room is doing its best to absorb it. The Admiral didn't speak for a long moment. Neither did Dr. Valith. Neither did I. The defense networks, he said finally. Not a question. More like a man working through something in real time, placing a piece into a puzzle that had just gotten considerably larger and more complicated. Before the accord. Yes, sir. She looked at him evenly. We knew something was out there long before the official Union contact. Earth's early warning systems had been picking up signal interference for about 12 years. We didn't have the translation capacity to understand what it was, but we knew something was coming. You were fighting, the Admiral said. Some of us were, she said. The ones who knew, the ones who were asked, the things that were coming ahead of the main Union wave, they weren't diplomatic vessels. I felt something change in the room when she said that. Because I knew what she was referring to. Everyone in the Union's military knew about the pre-contact incursion, the early swarm scouts, and the fringe system raiders who had probed Earth's outer orbital defenses 3 times before the official accord opened communication. It was a classified category in our strategic history files, and the official Union position on it was that Earth's population had been unaware, that the incidents had been contained, that there had been no significant contact. The official Union position, apparently, was incomplete. "How long were you in active combat operations?" the Admiral asked. 7 years, she said, starting at 19. He processed that. The treaty happened after, she said. For most people, the accord was the introduction. For some of us, she paused, just a fraction of a second. For some of us, it was the end of something we'd been doing for a long time without anyone to tell us we were doing it. Dr. Valeth had moved to the side counter and was being very quiet, professionally quiet. The secondary eyelids were fully down, which in Sarathi body language means something like witnessing something I have no adequate response to. I was still standing against the counter. My chart interface had been in my hands the whole time. I was holding it so tightly my knuckles, or the Calthine equivalent of knuckles, had gone pale. "Petty officer," Admiral Vore said. He had crossed his arms across his chest, a Keth posture which means something like gathering, centering. "I have to ask you something, and I want you to understand that this is not a debrief. This is not a formal inquiry. This is me asking you as one soldier to another." She looked at him. "Ask." "The injuries," he said, "the ones I'm looking at on this scan." He paused. "How much of that were you expected to survive?" The question landed in the room like a stone. She held his gaze. "None of it," she said. "Technically none of it." The Admiral's jaw tightened. In a Keth, that means the same thing it means in a human. Something is hitting somewhere soft. "And your government?" "Didn't know," she said. "Not the official one. There were layers. There are always layers." She looked down for just a second, the first time since he'd arrived that she'd looked anywhere but straight at him, and then she looked back up. "I'm not telling you this to be dramatic. I'm telling you because you asked and because I think," she stopped, reconsidered, "because I think you deserve the truth more than the version in the file." The Admiral was quiet for a long time. Then he did something I did not expect. He uncrossed his arms, he straightened. And he came to a formal position, the Keth version of it, which is slightly different from Union standard but recognizable, and he held it. "On behalf of the Galactic Union," he said, "I would like to acknowledge what you did. Before you had any reason to know what you were fighting, before we deserved your protection, before we even knew your name." Petty Officer Voss stared at him. For a moment, just a moment, the thing she'd been holding up with such careful, disciplined effort visibly wavered. "You don't have to do that," she said, and her voice for the first time was not entirely steady. "No," he agreed, "I don't." He held the position, "which is why I'm doing it. I've thought a lot about what happened after that. Not the big things, the small things. The way Dr. Valeth quietly offered Petty Officer Voss a glass of water, not making a ceremony of it, just setting it on the counter beside her, and the way Petty Officer Voss accepted it without making a ceremony of it either. The way the Admiral sat down, not in one of the patient chairs but on the edge of the second exam platform across from her, which put him at roughly her eye level. A deliberate choice. I noticed it. The conversation that followed was quieter. The formal questions had been asked and answered. What was left was the kind of talking you do after the formal questions, the real talking, the kind that fills in the spaces. He asked her where she'd trained. She said several places, most of which didn't exist anymore. He asked what kind of combat. She said asymmetric engagement. Their word for fighting something that doesn't use the same playbook you do, doesn't follow the same rules, doesn't have the same shape. He asked whether anyone from her unit was still serving. She was quiet for a moment before she answered that one. A few, she said, not many. He nodded, didn't push. She asked him, and this surprised me, that she asked him anything how long he'd been commanding. He said 23 years. She asked him if it got easier. He said no, but that the hard parts changed shape over time. She thought about that. Yeah, she said finally, that's about right. The exam ended 40 minutes past its scheduled time. Dr. Valith logged the results, all medically normal, nothing to flag, fit for duty across all parameters. She entered the standard clearance in the system. Before she left, Petty Officer Voss rolled her sleeves back down. She'd had to roll them up for part of the neural mapping. And this is the part I keep seeing when I close my eyes. The part that got to me more than any of it. The scars were there, running along both forearms, old and pale and numerous, the kind that come from years of proximity to violence. She rolled the sleeve down and fastened it at the cuff with the same precise, practiced movement she'd probably used every morning for years. Quick, clean, no ceremony, no hesitation. The same way you button up something that's yours. That's just part of you now. That you've decided to carry without apology, without explanation, without waiting for someone to notice. She looked up and caught me looking, and I genuinely thought that she'd be angry, or guarded, or cold. She just looked at me for a second. Then she gave me the smallest possible version of a nod, the kind that says, yes, you saw what you saw, and that's all right. I nodded back. I couldn't find any words. She walked to the door. At the threshold she paused, which surprised me, because I hadn't pegged her as someone who paused. She looked back at the Admiral. Sir, she said. He looked at her. Petty Officer. For the record, she said, I'm not carrying any of that anymore. She paused. The weight of it, I mean, it's there. Obviously, you just saw it on a screen. She gestured vaguely at the scan equipment. But I made my peace with it a long time ago. I don't need anyone to. She stopped herself, tried again. I came here to work. I'm good at my work. That's what matters. He held her gaze. Yes, he said, it is. She nodded once, and then she was gone. The bay was quiet after she left. Dr. Valith began packing up her equipment in the methodical way she always did. The Admiral remained seated on the edge of the second exam platform for a moment, looking at the now dark display screen where the scan readout had been. I couldn't help myself. I asked. Admiral, my voice came out quieter than I meant it to. What do we do with this? He looked at me, the dark horizontal pupils of his Keth eyes finding mine across the room. We honor it, he said. We treat her exactly as we would treat any officer of her rank and experience. He paused. And we never, under any circumstances, look at her like she needs our pity, because she doesn't. He stood, straightened his uniform. What she needs is exactly what she told you she needs, meaningful work, and colleagues who understand what that means. He left the bay. Dr. Valith finished packing her equipment. I stood at the counter with the sterilization canisters and thought about it. For a long time. The Meridian departed Sector 7 station 4 days later. Standard patrol route. 18 months, 12 systems, 7 scheduled contact points, and whatever unscheduled ones arose, and they always did. Petty Officer Voss reported to Medical Bay 7 on her first shift in off-duty clothes with the long sleeves. She sat down at the trauma support station. She went through the intake logs. She reorganized the emergency response kit in a way that was, I later heard Dr. Valith admit, significantly more efficient than the way they'd had it arranged before. She had opinions about equipment placement, about response protocols, about the way the bioresonance scanner should be angled relative to the trauma bay entrance to optimize transfer time. She was, by the end of the first week, absolutely indispensable. By the end of the second week, she had trained 2 of the junior medical staff in a triage technique that wasn't in the Union handbook. When Dr. Valeth asked her where it came from, she said, "Field adaptation." She said it the way you say something obvious. By the end of the first month, 4 different department heads had sent formal notes to the Admiral remarking on her performance. He was not surprised. I know because I was walking past his office when the 4th note came in, and I heard him read it, and what he said to himself, not to anyone, was, "Of course she is." I ran into her in the commissary, about 6 weeks into the patrol. She was eating something she'd made herself. The ship had a small kitchen annex that humans had been given access to, partly because their nutritional needs were different and partly, I suspected, because they were quietly driving the galley staff slightly insane with the complexity of their dietary preferences. She had a bowl of something that smelled earthy and warm, and she was reading something on her personal data pad. "Cadet Dow," she said without looking up. "Petty officer." I hesitated, then sat down across from her. I don't know why. She hadn't invited me, but she didn't look up from her reading and tell me to leave either, which I took as permission. We sat in silence for a while. She read. I drank whatever the galley was calling tea this week. Eventually she said, still reading, "You're going to ask me something." "Probably," I admitted. "Go ahead." I thought about what I actually wanted to ask. There were a lot of things. What the pre-contact incursion was actually like. How you keep going when the math says you shouldn't. Whether she ever regretted the path she took. I settled on something simpler. "Did you know that morning?" I asked. "When you came in for the exam, did you know the scan would show all of it?" She put the data pad down, looked at me. "Yes," she said. "Is that why you delayed it twice?" She considered the question. "Partly," she said. "I wasn't afraid of the scan. I was," she thought for a moment, "the way people think when they're trying to say something precisely rather than just quickly. I was tired of the reaction. The way people look at you when they see evidence of things that shouldn't have happened. The pity, or the horror, or the complicated guilt. People who feel responsible for things they had nothing to do with." She looked at her food. "I've been doing this for 10 years and I've had that reaction in every medical bay in 4 different facilities. It takes something out of you. After a while, you just want to walk into a room and do your job without it becoming about your history." I thought about that. "The Admiral didn't pity you," I said. "No," she agreed. She picked the data pad back up. "He didn't." "A beat." "That's why I answered his questions," she said. "The first real incident on the patrol happened at System 14, 2 months in. I wasn't there for the tactical side of it. I'm a medical bay tech, not a tactical officer, but I was in the bay when they brought in the casualties. The Meridian had encountered a pale swarm splinter group, a small cluster of the raiding organisms that had been responsible for the pre-contact incursion. They were remnants, technically. The official swarm had been pushed back beyond the outer arm and a ceasefire had been in effect for 2 years. But splinter clusters didn't follow ceasefires. Splinter clusters didn't really follow anything. They appeared. They struck. They disappeared. We took 9 injuries, 3 of them serious. I have been in Medical Bay 7 for 14 months. I have seen Dr. Valeth and her team work emergencies before. They are good, very good. The Meridian has the best medical staff in the 14th Fleet. What I saw from Petty Officer Voss that day was something else. She moved through that bay the way water moves through a space, filling every gap, anticipating every need, appearing exactly where she was supposed to be before anyone had consciously decided she was supposed to be there. She talked to the injured, not the clinical reassurance script that junior staff sometimes defaulted to. The "you're going to be fine," that means nothing because you can't possibly know. She talked to them like a person who had been exactly where they were and come back from it. She said things like, "I know it hurts right now and breathe with me and keep your eyes open. Stay here, that's it." The most serious casualty was a young Keth engineering officer, 22 standard years. Organ trauma. The pale swarm uses a type of impact weapon that causes internal resonance damage that doesn't always show externally. He was going into shock and he was scared, and he was calling for I heard it. I wasn't imagining it. He was calling for someone whose name I didn't know, in Keth, in the halting way people call for things that can't come. She took his hand. She held it. She sat with him while the surgical team worked. She said in standard, because her Keth wasn't fluent yet, she'd only been studying it 2 weeks, I have you. Right here, I have you. He stabilized. Dr. Valeth said later that the stabilization was primarily surgical. She also said, when I pressed her, that patients in shock who have a consistent, calm human contact in their immediate sensory field have measurably better outcomes than patients who don't. She said it in the measured, scientific way she said everything. Her secondary eyelids were fully down when she said it. Word got around after that. Not official word, unofficial word, the kind that moves faster and matters more. The kind that spreads through a ship's population person to person, in the commissary and the corridors and the shift handoffs. The human medic, in Bay 7, you want her if something goes wrong. I heard it 3 or 4 times before I realized it wasn't just the medical staff saying it. Engineering was saying it. Navigation, tactical support. One of the Sarathi navigation officers who had been skeptical, very vocally skeptical, in the first weeks, about the integration initiative and whether humans were really ready for fleet service, told her bunkmate that she had reconsidered certain aspects of her position. The bunkmate told someone who told me. I told no one, on account of that not being my news to circulate. But I thought about it. The Admiral started coming by the medical bay. Not in the emergency way, not in the official command inspection way either, just stopping in, during routine hours, asking Dr. Valeth about the bay's status, looking at the equipment logs, the kinds of things he could have reviewed on his command display without leaving his office. The third time he came by, Petty Officer Voss was restocking the emergency kit, and they ended up talking for about 20 minutes about something to do with the Dorath station siege, which he'd been part of and which, as it turned out, she had studied extensively. She had opinions about the tactical decisions made at Dorath. They disagreed about one of them, respectfully, with data. He left with his crest at a slightly higher angle than when he'd arrived, which in Keth means something like energized, engaged, the way you look when you've had a conversation that challenged you in a way you enjoyed being challenged. Dr. Valeth watched him go. Cadet Dow, she said. Yes, Doctor. Please make a note in the bay log that Admiral Vore conducted an informal status review. I looked at her. He didn't really do a status review. Her secondary eyelids moved, very slightly, in a way that on a human would have been the edge of a smile. No, she agreed, but the log should reflect something, and that is the most accurate available description. 4 months into the patrol, we hit something none of the charts had predicted. A gravity anomaly, a large one, the kind that forms when a dead star's remaining mass redistributes in unstable ways. We came out of jump transit directly into the edge of it, which was, and I am understating this for the sake of remaining calm while I tell it, not a good situation. The ship shook. The kind of shake that's not a technical term. It's just what it feels like, the whole structure vibrating, alarms going, the lighting dropping to emergency red, every piece of loose equipment becoming a projectile. Medical Bay 7 received 11 casualties in the first 7 minutes. 3 of them were crew members who had been in sections of the ship that decompressed partially before the emergency seals activated. 2 of them were in critical condition immediately. I am not going to detail what those 7 minutes looked like. Some things don't need to be detailed. They just need to be acknowledged as having happened. What I will tell you is what I saw at the 12-minute mark. The two critical casualties were being worked on simultaneously by Dr. Valeth's team. One of them, a Calthine communications officer, one of my own people, had gone into cardiac arrest. The emergency cardiac protocol requires two simultaneous interventions that typically need two trained practitioners. There was one, because the second one was needed at the other table. Petty Officer Voss was already moving. She came to the table. She looked at the situation. She said, in the precise, clear, flat voice of someone who has absolutely no room for anything but the work right now, "Tell me what you need." Dr. Valeth told her, fast and technical and in Union medical standard. And Petty Officer Voss did exactly what she was told. She was not Union certified for that specific intervention. Technically, officially in the regulation books, she was not supposed to be performing it. Technically. The Calthine communications officer survived. Dr. Valeth filed the incident report herself. She was very precise about the language. She noted that during a multi-casualty emergency situation, available personnel with demonstrated competency in the required procedure had been deployed at practitioner discretion. At practitioner discretion. I read the report 3 times. Every time I read it, I thought about the precision of that phrase, the exact, careful, accurate precision of it. The Admiral read the report too. He came to the bay the next morning, found Petty Officer Voss doing her routine equipment checks. Petty Officer. She looked up, Admiral. "Last night," he said. "I know," she said, "the certification." "Yes." She met his eyes. "Are you here to reprimand me?" He was quiet for a long moment. "No," he said. "I'm here to tell you that I'm initiating the paperwork for your Union medical certification, the full one, not just the integration track partial certification, the full Union trauma practitioner's license." She stared at him. "The process takes about 4 months," he said. "You'll need to complete the formal assessments. Based on your file and last night, I don't anticipate any issues." He paused. "You should have had it before you were transferred here. That's a failure of the integration process, and I intend to note it formally." She was quiet for a moment. Then, "You don't have to do that." He looked at her steadily. "You said that to me before." A beat. "And I gave you the same answer I'm giving you now," he said. "No, I don't. Which is why I'm doing it." The certification process took 3 months and 12 days. She passed every assessment the first time. The evaluating board, 3 Union medical officers from the Fleet Medical Authority, filed their report in language that Dr. Valeth later described as unusually warm for a certification document. Demonstrated mastery of trauma intervention protocols under pressure. Clinical judgment consistent with senior practitioner standard. Recommended for fast-track consideration for lead practitioner role in multi-species medical environments. When the certification came through, the Admiral had it presented formally. A small ceremony, just the medical bay staff and a few of the officers who'd become familiar with her work. He stood up and he said a few words, and she accepted the document with that same straight spine and those same quiet hands. After, when the others were getting back to their duties, I walked past her where she was still standing with the document. "Congratulations," I said. "Thank you." She was looking at the certification document, the Union seal on it, her name in standard script. "How does it feel?" I asked. She thought about it. Actually thought, the way she did with everything, carefully, precisely. "Like a door that should have been open a long time ago," she said, but a pause. "You know, there's something to be said for knowing what's on the other side before you walk through it." She looked up. "I know what this work is. I've done it. Not under this name, not with this stamp on it, but I know what it is." She looked back at the document. "Having the piece of paper doesn't change what I know. It just makes it visible." I thought about that for a long time after. About 2 weeks after the certification, something small happened that I want to include because I think it matters. We had a new transfer come in, a young Sarathi ensign, fresh out of the academy, first posting. He was assigned to communications. He was 20 years old and he had clearly never been off his home system before, and he was trying very hard not to look like he was overwhelmed by everything, which meant he was visibly overwhelmed by everything. He came to the medical bay for his own intake exam. Nervous, looking at the scanning equipment with the expression of someone who has been told something is painless and believes it approximately 0%. Petty Officer Voss was the one who saw him in. I watched through the window of the prep area. I wasn't supposed to be watching. I had sterilization canisters to refill. There are always sterilization canisters to refill, but I watched. She walked him through every step before she did it. She explained the equipment in plain language, not the technical version. The here is what this actually does and why version. She noticed when he tensed at the bioresonance arch and she said, "It's the sound, right? It has a frequency that bothers some species. You can put these in." She handed him something, ear protection. She'd had it ready. He was startled. "How did you know?" "I know that frequency bothers Sarathi's secondary auditory nerves," she said. "I looked it up before you came in." He stared at her. "You looked it up," he said, "for me." "It's your appointment," she said, simply. It seemed relevant. She did the whole exam in 18 minutes. He left looking considerably less overwhelmed than he'd arrived. On his way out, he stopped in the doorway, the same way she had, on her first day, I realized. And he looked back at her and said something in Sarathi that my language chip translated as something approximately like "thank you for being careful with me." She said in standard, "That's the job." After he left, she went back to her equipment, back to her checks, back to the quiet, precise, unhurried work of knowing exactly what she was doing and doing it. And I thought, standing there with the sterilization canisters, like always, that the Admiral had been right. That's what she needs, meaningful work, and colleagues who understand what that means. She'd found it. A few months later, I was reorganizing the Bay archives when I came across something I hadn't expected. The intake scan. From that first morning. It was in the standard medical file, correctly archived, nothing unusual about it technically. But I pulled it up and I looked at it for a long time. The layered map, the white bones and the blue soft tissue and the gold neural pattern, the old fractures, the deep tissue marks. I thought about what she'd said in the commissary. I'm not carrying any of that anymore. The weight of it. I looked at the scan. I thought about the word she'd used, peace. She'd made her peace with it, that was the phrase. I'm not sure peace is exactly the right word for what I saw in her during those months. Peace suggests something passive, something still, something settled. What I saw in her wasn't still, it was kinetic, moving. The kind of thing that has survived something and decided, deliberately, that survival wasn't the end of the story. She wasn't at peace with it in the way of someone who had surrendered to it. She was at peace with it in the way of someone who had looked it straight in the face and decided it would not be the most important thing about her. The scars would remain. They were part of the map. They weren't the territory. I closed the archive file. I refilled the sterilization canisters. The Meridian completed its 18-month patrol and returned to Sector 7 station. Petty Officer Marin Voss, at this point officially Union Trauma Practitioner First Class, pending a second-tier promotion that was already in process, was among the crew who walked off the ship and onto the station docking level. I walked a few meters behind her in the disembarkation line. I wasn't doing it on purpose. It just worked out that way. The station docking level was busy. It always was. Ships arriving, ships departing, personnel from a dozen different species moving in every direction with the particular kind of controlled chaos that a functioning multi-species port generates. She walked through it the same way she walked through everything. Deliberate, spine straight, not fast, not slow, looking at things with that clear, assessing gaze. She was met by 3 people from the Earth Contingent's administrative office, standard protocol for returning personnel, paperwork, and updated assignment orders, and the brief debriefing before leave was authorized. The administrative officer, a human woman roughly her age, said something to her that I couldn't hear, and she responded, and for the first time in 18 months I saw her face do something unexpected. She smiled. Not a small, closed, professional smile, a real one, brief, there and gone, but real. I don't know what the administrative officer said to her. It doesn't matter. I just know that for one moment in the busy chaos of the station docking level, I saw Maren Voss look like someone who was glad to be exactly where she was. I submitted this testimony at the request of the Union Historical Preservation Bureau, which is compiling records of the early integration period for the Centennial Archive Project. They asked me to describe what I witnessed. I've tried to do that accurately. They also asked me to describe the significance of what I witnessed. I've been thinking about how to answer that. Here's what I keep coming back to. The bioresonance scan sees everything. That's the point of it. There's nowhere to hide from it. Every healed fracture, every old wound, every place where the body adapted around damage, all of it visible, all of it rendered in that 3-dimensional color-coded map. Most people, I think, experience that as exposure. The medical bay as a place where your history is involuntarily made visible. Petty Officer Voss experienced something different. Or maybe she'd had so much practice being exposed that she'd found a way to let it be something other than threatening. What I saw on that morning and in the 18 months that followed was a person who had been asked by a scan, by a doctor, by an admiral, by every casualty who came through the bay to be visible, to let the history show, to not put the sleeve down before anyone saw what was underneath, and who met that visibility with something I can only call integrity. Not the performed kind, not the look how strong I am kind, the quiet kind, the kind that doesn't need an audience and doesn't explain itself and just is. She was who she was in the exam room, and she was the same person in the trauma bay, and the commissary, and the certification ceremony, and the docking level. The same person at 0758 and at 0200 during a multi-casualty emergency, and in the small space of a young ensign's frightened intake exam. The scars weren't the story, they were just part of the map. The person reading the map was the story. And the Admiral, who had stood in front of that scan display and frozen, and who had asked his careful question, and who had held his formal posture in acknowledgement of something the Union had been too late to witness, understood that from the beginning. That's why I'm still thinking about it. That's why I think about it every time I walk into Medical Bay 7 and check the sterilization canisters. Every single time.